Nikhil, if you want to
Yeah,
start your presentation,
yeah.
you
Hi,
please.
I'll just share my screen.
Thank you.
Okay, so are the slides? I guess they are visible. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So hello everyone. First of all, a big thanks to the Emerging Markets Conference for giving me an opportunity to present here. So this work is based out of my PhD thesis at IIM Bangalore, and the idea I'm trying to explore is like how the factors that have been identified to predict returns in the past. So there is a vast return anomaly literature. How those factors affect trading volume. So and the thought that I followed is like this: if investors were to use those anomalies for their trading decisions, then what if those anomalies disagree with each other? They are not saying unanimously the same stock to buy or sell. Then then that disagreement should give rise to a trading volume response. And the idea that why disagreement might impact trading is very fundamental, because if we think that if two investors disagree on the future valuation of an asset, then that would drive them to trade with each other. Another thing that got me motivated to this project was that the studies of trading volume, they're very scarce as compared to the studies on returns. And the main reason behind is that the standard rational expectation assumption that is inherent in all asset pricing models, they have no role for trading because the equilibrium is fully revealing. We have to have some other form of added randomness to have some role for trading. For instance, in the Kyle model, we have a noise trading as well as differences in the information which gives rise to trading. So departure from rational expectation settings drives us to the differences of opinion models. So here the underlying criteria is that investors agree to disagree in equilibrium. So here we are not really talking about information. We are more into opinions and interpretations, and we can have different priors and interpretations and yet be okay with that, that two investors can have different interpretation of the same information and yet be fine with that. And in that sense, disagreement is related to trading volume. One problem with studying disagreement is that it is unobservable. We don't get to observe the trading positions of investors, so we have to rely on proxies. And the most common proxy that has been used in literature is analyst forecast dispersion, and it suffers from several limitations. Some of them I have pointed, like it is only from a limited group of agents, and their motives for generating trade might be to generate profit for the firm. There are evidence of bias and herding among analysts, and most importantly, the coverage is very highly skewed in that they only cover mostly for the large firms. So for a smaller and medium-sized firms, the forecast dispersion is imprecise because we don't have enough analysts following a firm. Overall, it's not a market-based measure. And in that sense, I propose a new measure of disagreement in this work and try to see how it relates to trading volume and what more can we learn about disagreement in that setting. So to a very brief literature overview, which is related to trading volume and dispersion. So the paper by Kendall and Pearson, they study earnings announcement, and what they find is that even when there is no new net information coming to the market, which is to say that there is no price change during an earnings announcement, there is a abnormal volume in that stock. So it must be that the zero net information that comes out of an announcement is being interpreted differently across the market participant, and hence this is a direct evidence of differential interpretation of whatever that information is coming to the market. On the empirical side, as I said, the studies are relatively scarce. Cordia and others in 2006 RFS paper is perhaps the first and comprehensive study which identifies several aspects of trading and how it's affected. So it ranges from liquidity trading to informed trading to dispersion of beliefs. So liquidity trading might be just due to portfolio rebalancing, and they identify several variables which could proxy or which could capture all these aspects. And then we have finally a dispersion of beliefs. They use analyst forecast dispersion. So this is the paper where which is going to be my base specification, and I study my disagreement measure against the backdrop of the empirical setting of this paper. So these are the list of 36 anomalies that I consider in my work. They range from profitability, valuation, momentum, and these all come from a published paper. And all these are constructed from CRISP and CompuStat. And so how do I construct this disagreement measure? Let's say for each firm and for each month, what I do is for each month, I cross-sectionally rank all the stocks using one particular anomaly. Let's say I start with price to earnings ratio, and I sort all the stocks using price to earnings ratio. Now I know that from prior literature that low PE stocks predicts higher return in future. So what I do is I assign the bottom 30% of stocks having the lowest price to earnings ratio a buy signal, and the highest PE ratio a sell signal. I do the same with other anomalies like return on assets and book to market ratio. So in the end, what I have is that for each stock and for each month, I have a list of 36 trading signals emanating out of these 36 anomalies. So the dispersion in these signals is what I call disagreement. So I assign a +1 number to buy and -1 number to sell. So disagreement is basically standard deviation of this +-1 numbers. So this is how I construct disagreement. There are obviously there are other ways to look at disagreement. I can look at absolute deviation or principal component, but I stick with standard deviation and use this as robustness checks. And the hypothesis is, so I study volume in a predictive regression framework where I try to study next period volume and how it's affected by current signal deviation with controls and fixed effects. And the idea is that to the extent that investors differ in their model to predict future their future return, and they do so by trading on a particular anomaly signal. So investors use different models of asset valuation, and then the output that they get out of this model. So these different models are basically different return anomalies that I've considered in the paper. And the disagreement between those trading signals in the anomalies, this gives rise to trading. Apart from this hypothesis, I also hypothesize that the coefficient beta 1 should be higher for small firms. This is because small firms have a very opaque information environment because the value relevant information is not available easily to the public. So what would be a trading strategy in a firm in which we do not know much about it, apart from their fundamentals and stock price history? I would try to understand what the future performance would be based on those numbers only. And hence, I hypothesize that investors would be more likely to use those anomalies because other value relevant information is not easily available. Similarly, it should be higher for value firms. And the idea is that the value investing predominantly relies on a fundamental to price ratio. And this is what makes up a lot of anomalies. So if you look at the book to market and cash flow to price, earnings to price. So most of these anomalies are actually based out of using some fundamental to price ratio. Similarly, after Edgar implementation, I would expect that fundamental information is readily available to the market, and hence the use of anomalies would be higher. So the data comes from CRISP and CompuStack, and forecast dispersion is from IBIS. And I make a point in the paper that I try to be as aware of the data snooping concern plaguing the written anomaly literature as possible. And it is important because many of the factors have been identified to not work out of the sample, and it has been ascribed to some form of data snooping. So this is the first study which in my knowledge to look on the trading volume and the written anomalies in conjunction. So data snooping concern mostly comes when a same factor or same regression structure is being studied over and over again using different anomalies. So this is not the case here. It is a very rudimentary disagreement measure because I'm only looking at standard deviation of +-1 numbers. And importantly, I'm not using the exact degree of return prediction, which is to say that if one particular anomaly predicts 10% higher return, while another predicts only 0.1% higher returns, I don't make the distinction. Because if it were so, then someone can come and argue me, okay, you are using only the ones which are the most useful or which makes the results more striking. So, and hence I again argue that it's, if I include or exclude few anomalies, the results will not be greatly affected. I'm using all the factors from a published paper. So to avoid any cherry picking of what factors I want to use in my study, because we have to understand that there are so many factors in the literature, it's impossible to study all of them. And I study all the sample periods. So there is no sample selection bias here as well. So one point I want to make in correlations is that, so these are all the explanatory variables in the regression, and the variables number from 1 to 13 are from the earlier regression. The 14th one is the disagreement measure, which I propose. What I found is that price market size and number of estimates following a firm are highly correlated with each other. And hence I choose to remove market size from all the regression to avoid multicollinearity concerns. Another observation is that disagreement is positively related to prior measures of fundamental uncertainty like earnings surprise and earnings volatility, as well as forecast dispersion. But the correlation is not strikingly high. So they are related, they are measuring disagreement, but the type of disagreement being measured is somewhat different. So when it comes to results, so when I include standard deviation in the regressions, I get a very significant and strong effect. So it is both statistically and economically significant in the sense that a one standard deviation increase in disagreement predicts 16% higher volume in the next period. More importantly, when I include disagreement in the specification, the coefficient on the forecast dispersion, which has been the tried and tested proxy for disagreement, falls by 50%, but not the other way around. So in a sense that the way I'm capturing disagreement takes care of this. It captures investor disagreement more inherently than forecast dispersion. And I'm able to explain up to 5 to 6% of unexplained variation in trading volume using my measure of disagreement. If I use different turnover measures rather than using log turnover, I use a change in log turnover. I adjusted using a GRT adjustment, which is used in literature. I used market-based, market-adjusted measures. I also try to remove illiquidity from my turnover measure. In all cases, I get a significant coefficient, but the forecast dispersion turns negative in 4 out of 7 cases. The same holds true when I use different measures of disagreement. I try with absolute deviation. I try with principal component deviation. We also look at NYSE and NASDAQ stocks separately. And I've used 70-30 split in the sense that I'm using 30% stocks as my buy category. I try to change it to 20 and 80%. Even then I'm getting, so the qualitative nature of all the results is similar across different measures. In the last, I try a rank regression as well, because I get a very good empirical setting, because what I do is I cross-sectionally rank stocks for each month and find their ranks. And then I do the same thing for each month separately. So what this gives me is I can compare the volume of a stock today and 20 years ago. I could not do this in an earlier specification because, as we know, that the trading volume has skyrocketed in the past. So using rank regression also, what I find is that when standard deviation, when fundamental disagreement rank changes from 25th to 75th percentile, the volume is higher by 28%. So it's a very strong effect that I obtain using rank regressions as well. And as I said, I expect to find some patterns in the disagreement volume relationship.
You have about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, I'll finish in 2 minutes. Thanks. So I find that, okay, the coefficient is higher for small and medium firms as opposed to big firms. Similarly, the coefficient is higher after Edgar implementation and for value firms, which have high book to market ratio. So if I use different 5-year subsamples, here also, although the coefficient changes, but it is significant both economically and statistically, but the coefficient of forecast dispersion almost vanishes. So it seems that the impact of forecast dispersion is much more prevalent when we use a big sample. It is not present for smaller samples. So this is my last slide. And here what I claim is that, okay, what more can we understand in the volume disagreement regressions? So what I say is that if the value relevant information is not coming out of a firm smoothly, meaning that it is either complex or disrupted, then what will happen? Investors do not have confidence on the information that comes on, or it is not present, or it is not present in a very complex manner. Then investors would want to use simpler and easier methods for investing. And those simpler methods tend to be the anomalies. So if I don't understand the firm's 10K report easily, I would want to go to a stock screener and sort stocks based on this anomaly and try to invest using that. And this is what I found. When the information from a firm is not available easily, when the number of analysts are not following the firm, or the firm's document size is big, or they have a lot of complex words, the coefficient is higher as opposed to the when the firms have a very easy to understand document. So it also again gives me an idea of how investors are trading. They are trading on anomalies because of I'm getting a significant coefficient here. So and for so overall, so I just skip this slide. It is I think I can skip it. So yeah, uh, that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Nikhil. Prasanna, I think you are the discussant, so please stop your presentation. Thank you.
I think, Nikhil, can you stop sharing?
Sure, sure. 1 second. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, organizers, for giving me an opportunity to discuss this paper. I'm a banking researcher, but at the same time, I'm an active trader as well. So I can't say that it's totally out of my alley. So this, the paper is titled Trading Volume and Dispersion of Signals by Nikhil. Let me quickly summarize what the paper does. Nikhil has done a good job of explaining what he's trying to do. So he's proposing a new measure of investor disagreement. And as we know, analyst dispersion is what is used. Even in banking, just to show that banks are more opaque, you have disagreement of analysts that's being used. Nikhil finds issues with this measure, which is fine. And if he uses this dispersion in anomalies as a new measure of investor disagreement, and he shows that that measure is related to future volume and economically meaningful volume. So no quibbles about that. Now, what is this signal? He picks up this paper of Nikhil, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing this correctly, Linema and Roberts, and McLean and Pontiff. His anomalies come from actually 2 papers and not 1, if I have read it correctly. And then he creates buy and sell signal for each stock under each anomaly. And for each stock, he creates, calculates dispersion. So think of a stock which is buy in 2 and sell in another 2. That will have like maximum dispersion, and then he'll relate it to future volume. This is what he does. Now, what I like about the paper, I think this is very creative. This whole use of anomaly is quite creative. I do agree with Nikhil that analyst dispersion has a lot of issues. He makes a very good attempt to place the contribution in the context of literature. There is an extensive discussion of literature. In fact, I'm going to argue it's too much. Good discussion about RE versus noise and disagreement. It was a good refresher for me. It was quite good. Need to think, as I said, analyst dispersion is well motivated, and the measure seems to have potential for answering several other questions as well. In fact, some of the questions with analyst dispersion can be revisited. What this measure shows. So I think this measure has potential, and it shows a lot of there is creativity. That way something that I liked. But then I'm going, instead of making a laundry list of comments, I'm going to focus on 4 specific comments, and I'm not going to leave it there. I'm also going to suggest what can be done to address those comments. That's going to be the plan. Comment 1. I think the choice of paper is not right, because this whole paper is about anomalies that don't work. It's not about anomalies that work. Out of 36, 28 don't work. These authors look for what, correct me if I'm wrong, some 100 years of data, pre-sample, in-sample, post-sample, post-publication. Most of the anomalies don't work. If anomalies themselves don't work, where is this connection coming from? Who is trading this? This must be all noise traders who are trading this. Why will any serious trader trade on anomalies that don't work? So I think this choice of paper to pick anomalies is wrong, and this should have been mentioned in the paper. Although there is a lot of effort spent on discussing all kinds of papers, this is just, at least the draft that I have, there is no mention that this paper actually shows none of these anomalies work. In fact, the other one from where the 5 anomalies come, that also shows after publications, these guys don't work. These anomalies don't work. That's that McLean and Pontiff paper. In fact, Jacobs and Muller 2020, which is not cited, I think the author should look at it. So then if the anomalies are not working, which investors are using them? I don't see any test that investors are using them. If only when investors use them, there is a question of disagreement, and then only all these things. I understand, I think author, Nikhil said there is no data snooping and all that. I'll come to that, but that's fine. You find something is good, but then what you're claiming, I don't think that's, at least based on these anomalies, that doesn't seem to be the case. So I think the whole idea that, look, there is some effect and that's why I think investors are using them, I find it hard to buy that. Next, coming to data snooping. Now I agree with Nikhil that I'm not talking about an active kind of p-hacking where somebody sat and tried some combination, tried from 70-30, 80-20, tried getting that kind of a data snooping might not have happened in this case. I agree with that. But then the defense for data snooping, I found like 3-4 reasons. For example, that data snooping usually happens on stuff which has already been done. Mine is new stuff, so this cannot be data snooping. This is not going to work. You have to show rigorously that this is not coincidence. This is not, by data snooping, I will include coincidence as well. You can't just give like 4 reasons. I've done -1, +1, so mine is not data snooping. This guy Lowe and McKinley says that data snooping happens on old stuff, mine is new stuff, therefore it's not data snooping. This is not going to stand scrutiny. For example, what is the basis of using this paper? As I've told you before, the paper where anomalies don't work. Why is this so special? In fact, 5 out of 79 from why did you pick these 5 from McLean? Where is it coming from? Why this combination of these two? And that too, I read it carefully. 31. See, this Roberts paper has 36 anomalies, and your paper picks 31 from there, 5 from McLean, and say there is 36 anomalies. I don't understand. Maybe there is a reason, but these things don't smell well. And there's no discussion about these papers. While first 7-8 pages is all about literature, these papers are just mentioned. These papers, I am not in this literature, but any referee of this literature will know these papers. Will momently he or she sees the paper, he will know what it is. So not discussing is not going to help. And I'm sorry, this reason I felt computational and time constraint and my end prevent me from using anomalies. This is not going to work. We are serious full-time researchers. Computational constraint, time constraint. What do you mean time constraint? We are full-time researchers and we cannot have time constraint to do research. If you have time constraint, the referee will say, I'm sorry, I also have time constraint. Let's reject the paper. Time constraint is not an excuse for not doing a paper. There is a valid excuse. In fact, while McLean and Pontiff, while talking about it, you say that some of the data are proprietary. Fair enough. If they use proprietary data, you don't have access to data, fair enough, but list those. Out of 79, say that 74 use proprietary data and that's why I'm using 5. Fair enough, I'll take it. But to say that I don't have time or I don't have computation, this is not going to work in any serious paper. I think that sort of put me off, but fair enough. And third, anomalies themselves can reflect risk. I'll come to this. There is this famous Cochrane statement that even if opportunity is widely publicized, investors, there are not, I'll come to this point when I talk about solutions.
Prasanna, you have about 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure. I'll wrap up quickly. And writing, it took me to about 12 pages to realize what's going on. There's too much of literature. Let me tell you quickly what I think should be done. You should start with a broad list of anomalies. Use anomalies that work because you're saying investors use them. Test whether they actually represent arbitrage opportunities. Test whether they're being used. Finally, test the outcome you're interested in. So let me give you an example. Start from Harvey et al. They have 314 anomalies. That's the standard. I don't think your paper is a standard. And look at these papers. They have anomalies that work. Then divide your data into pre-sample, in-sample, post-sample, post-publication. If it is actually an anomaly that works, it should work pre-sample, in-sample, post-sample, but may not work post-publication. That means people are using it. If it's a risk factor, it should work even after post-publication because it's a risk factor. Publication shouldn't matter. So show these things instead of saying investors using it. Finally, you are showing that these things work on opaque stocks. That's a red flag. Because if investors, this Jacobs and Muller JFE paper shows that post-publication returns come down for liquid stocks. They are transparent stocks. that means people are using them. So the whole idea of post-publication returns going down means traders are trading on these anomalies. Now your stocks are opaque stocks. You know, the post-publication return on them will not come down because traders cannot trade them. You said some issues with their information, but there are issues with their trading costs also. So I think this thing needs to be clarified. It shows me Cochrane's point. You know, again, Pharma's famous statement, we all know this is all risk. This is nothing about anomaly. So finally, I think it's a creative measure. I think there's significant scope for tightening the analysis and presentation. All the best, and I think this measure is really good and can be used to good use. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Prasanna. Nikhil, if you want to respond, and then you can take questions as well.
Yeah. First of all, thanks a lot, Prasanna. Obviously, there are some of the things which I had not thought of, and overall, some of the great points that you have told me. So one of the I think doubt it was like why I've chosen 5 anomalies from McLean paper. So basically, the paper by Linnemana and Roberts, they do not consider momentum anomalies. So I wanted to include that section as well, and hence those 5 are the momentum anomalies from McLean paper. And yeah, I would try to make the argument more strong as to why the particular choice of anomalies I am using. And the whole idea when I started this project was to pick a paper. So I started in 2018 working on this and then choose all the anomalies for it. So yeah, I have to give more thought on it as to why I had to choose that particular paper and whether the anomalies are working or not. And I agree that what Linneman and Roberts show is that the anomalies work only in sample. So one of the comments that I've also got in other conferences as well, that I have to look at the anomalies before the study uses the study start sample, and what is the effect after the publication process, and do I see any difference? And yeah, I take this comment well. And regarding data snooping, I agree, like, okay, yeah, more, I need to do it more rigorously. And so the idea in the whole paper is it's that, okay, I'm trying to find, okay, how are people trading, whether people are trading using anomalies or not. And so my understanding was that, okay, if I'm finding a significant relationship, then this gives some light on whether people are trading or not. So I think that, okay, I need to give some more direct evidence into this hypothesized relation as to why people are whether people are trading using anomalies or not. And yeah, I guess, yeah. So I'll take some questions which are there in the chat.
There are a couple of questions in the group chat.
Yes,
and then
yes, so I'll answer them one by one.
Can I explicate on my question in the chat, Nikhil? That's the first question in the chat, which is that the paper is about disagreement, which I think is a very important topic. What you have anchored it in is in anomalies. Now, anomalies could potentially be one source of rational disagreement. There is a huge literature on the value relevance of accounting numbers. And right from the time of Graham and Dodd and others, people have done what is called value investing, which is essentially based on investing on the basis of perceived value based on accounting numbers. So the disagreement may not necessarily arise just from anomalies. I would say the first port of call really are the traditional value measures arising from accounting numbers. And different people have different views on how relevant they are and to what extent they will contribute to their evaluation. And even the academic analysis in this part has shown that it has changed with time. And therefore, I'm recommending this very recent paper by Mary Barth and others who have done a huge lot of analysis of the value relevance accounting numbers with reviewed literature, done a lot of things, and I think it's a great paper. And there are lots of others. So value relevance of accounting numbers is what I'm focusing on as a subject point.
Okay. So Pradeep, yeah, thanks for this. So the idea that I begin with exploring is that, okay, so you have a public information about a firm. So that is the stock price history and the accounting fundamentals that are present in the past. How would an investor, so suppose I want to invest in a stock today, what I would want to do? What is the simplest strategy I could follow for investing a stock? So I could go to a website, start a screener and say, okay, show me the stock using this anomaly. So they have a lot of screeners based on, okay, whether what is the past performance, which is the momentum anomaly, what is the book to market ratio, are the stock high or low book to market ratio, and then using those things, I may pick those stocks. Some other investors would use some other anomaly for this. So I'm not really trying to capture how those valuation numbers come into how those accounting numbers are used for valuing the firm. I'm trying to say, okay, given a accounting number like book value or earnings, I try to see how is investor trying to use it. So in that sense, I'm trying to place it rather than looking into how using book value or earnings and accruals I can find the value of the firm. So it's a little different from what you're saying. So is that does that answer the question?
I mean, it's a matter of perspective. I mean, once you value the firm and you see a price, you see the difference, and therefore you take a view on trading. So, to my mind, it is actually a stage before, and the other one is more following public signals. So,
okay. So I'll take the next question.
I think Kumar has a comment or a question. Kumar, if you want to ask your question, please do.
Sure, Vikas. Thank you. I think the discussion raised a number of important issues, but the one point that I was a little unclear on is the following. Let's say that it's true that anomalies don't work. You know, that's the evidence coming from the academic research, right? But let's say that market participants still continue to use some of these signals. Because they have different priors on on these signals. They don't read academic papers, right? I mean, there's a very large world out there of active money management. So I was just wondering, to the extent that people still use these anomalies, even if they are explained by risk, etc., which I think is the discussant's good point. It could still result in differences of opinion in trading because someone may be using short interest and giving it a high weight, and someone may be using insider buying or selling and giving it a high weight. And if the two signals have opposite predictability, which I think is sort of the structure of your research design, right, then you may still see. I mean, it was just a question. It is the thought that came to my mind. I don't know if the discussant has a thought on it or.
Should I answer? Because I was not prepared for this. Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
So if there's time. So where is the evidence that they're using it? That's my point. My point to the authors, it's the burden of proof is on the author. I'm not going to assume that they're going to use it. The author has to show that these anomalies are being used. And the point is you pick up the exact 36 which don't work at all. Why should you pick up 36 which don't work? There are a bunch of there which people have shown that work. So you can't just assume they use it. That's my point. He has to show evidence that they're using, somebody's trading on this anomaly. I'm sure there are people jumping around here and there, somebody's shorting, somebody's going long, but where is the proof that they're being used?
Okay, so Prasanna, one thing I want to comment on this is that, okay, so they are now, as you said, the 36 anomalies the paper shows that they do not work out of the samples, but I'm looking at the entire sample. So yeah, if you were to say that, okay, if I look at after the anomalies were post publication, that I agree, but before they were public, yeah, you have some.
No, sorry, I think we should. No, you're not.
Sure. Okay, fine.
In sample, they work. That's how they've been created. They should work out of sample. That's the test. Okay. Of course, they work in sample. I'm not saying those who published those papers have done a fraud. No.
Okay.
One possibility, given that we have a couple of minutes, one possibility could be you could look at some evidence on fund flows, which could actually directly provide link between investors actually taking these anomalies seriously. It's entirely possible that investors may be using them, but they may just not work out of sample. So some evidence from fund flow or anything of that sort might be more direct evidence.
I agree. All that I'm saying is there should be some evidence that people are using that. I'm not saying they don't use at all. Maybe they're using, but Paper needs to provide it. It can't be left to the reader. That's all.
Yeah, agree.
Thanks, Prasanna. If there are any more questions, we can take one. I think there are some more in the group chat. If you want to address those, Nikhil, we have a minute or so before we move on to the next paper.
So model incorporate volume. So I'm looking at Malay Day's comment. Income volume to explain its impact on independent volume modeling. Okay. So Malay is saying that the model incorporate volume to explain its impact on asset pricing, where I'm on independent volume modeling. Okay. So in terms of modeling, I just try to see what are the so the idea is to look at what are the other empirical determinants of volume. So disagreement comes into that picture, and all I'm trying to say is using those anomalies, if there is a very valid reason to look at if people are trading using that, then I should expect a relationship on that front. And hence, so I don't try to model volume as such. I'm using the earlier models on volume, which says disagreement is a determinant of volume. How can I construct how can I look at disagreement using the existing disagreement volume model that people have looked at? So that's what I try to do. And do I take another comment or?
Yeah, if you want to quickly address that, yeah, sure.
We reasonably agreed that. Okay, so Ajay Shah is saying that he was a little disappointed. Only a small part is being explained. But as I said, there are several other ways. For instance, I give a simple example of Tesla. So it is a very visible stock, and it is just included into S&P 500. So these two, visibility and inclusion in S&P 500, these are unrelated to disagreement. So a lot of volume on this stock is because of liquidity driven trading, because all the ETFs and the mutual funds have to include this, have to buy the stock. So this trading is coming out of those things. So there are several other determinants of trading unrelated to disagreement. And that's why we don't see an all-out impact of disagreement and volume.
Thank you, Nikhil. I think we can move